Hello and welcome back to a normal edition of Council Watch. Now, for a few weeks now, I've been waiting for quite an important announcement. It actually arrived yesterday, but instead of blowing the trumpet and a big fanfare, we got this.
And from the office, we have Taylor Williams, who's our committee clerk and planning assistant, and Sarah Foote, who's our town clerk. We're very honoured to have you, Sarah.
Well, Shona Bendix, the old town clerk, who's been missing for a very long time, actually on her LinkedIn profile said she finished at the council in June, July, August, September. So I've been waiting for this announcement for some time because clearly she'd gone and nobody was saying anything about it. So I just thought that a bit strange and rather a weird way just to drop it into the start of the meeting with nothing on. So anyway, our new town clerk has been doing a marvellous job from what I can see for the past year, 18 months or so. And she deserves the job. I just thought there would have been a bit more bells and whistles, to say, way. But as she is the most senior person on the council, it seems a very low-key way to announce it. But what worried me the most was the fact that it had all been done on the quiet. Now, I've been watching the Personnel Committee minutes. I've been looking at the agendas in advance and hoping for a clue. Now, I was quite aware that this was not the sort of thing that was going to be discussed in public, of course, because this is one extremely good example of where you don't discuss it in public because clearly one's gone, new one's in, and it needs to be done properly. But usually we get treated to an agenda item that gives a clue about what we're going to be talking about. And this one was a bit odd as well because I noticed the last meeting's discussion was sort of pointing at another member of the staff who I think, because I still get a bit confused with the strange titles, there would need to be adjustments to Lauren's contract because of other things that were happening. Now, I'm assuming the other things that were happening were the new town clerk. But of course, they don't tell us. We don't know, The only way we actually knew that the old one had gone, if you looked carefully, was by looking at the new website where the old name vanished. So, this openness and transparency thing, they actually work the complete opposite. Nothing is open, nothing is transparent, yet they bang on about it all the time. And I just find that irritating. Clearly it's allowable because they refer to their codes of conduct, codes of practice, all the other agreements that are in place to do with staffing and things like that. They bang on about that all the time. But when you come to the most senior person in the council being appointed, it was all done very, very quietly, as if we're not allowed to know. Well, one of the things that you have to get your head round with the council has been talked about a few times actually in the meetings. It's the differences between the committees, the subcommittees and the working groups. And there was quite a nice bit about working groups the other day where it said that the idea of a working group is that it's there for a specific purpose. It's brought into existence, it does its job, and at the very end of it, it's closed down. And if you need it again, you start a new one up. If it is an open-ended thing with content that is repeatable and comes up fairly often, then it will be a subcommittee. And the thing that just wrangled a little bit recently was this notion that the subcommittees are not going to be subject to scrutiny. And I can sort of understand things like perhaps ones where they're setting budgets, the financial ones, because very clearly the Admissions to Meetings Act, even though it's old, 1960s, a long time ago. So we're looking at a 65-year-old act, but it's still in force and it clearly is there to protect certain features. And what consistently annoys me now is that not even agenda items are explained. So it's a case of they're going to talk about it in confidential settings, but they're not even going to tell us that that's what they're talking about. So sometimes they'll actually put a little thing in the agenda that says they're going to talk about this. Some matters may be confidential. Okay, we can accept that. But increasingly now, almost everything goes into confidential. And it would seem that the subcommittee who are looking at policies and rules is going to be done totally in secret. Now, I'm not a legal expert. I don't pretend to be. I'm just a member of the public. But I don't find anything financial or working against the public interest in allowing the public to see rule setting. You know, lots of the complaints that we have about the council, and perhaps, you know, in the days when the behaviour was a bit dodgy, we were looking for rules that could be sort of used to control the way the meetings actually progressed, and what, if anything, could happen if a councillor stepped out of line. You know, there have to be policies and rules to cover these things. But the setting of them, the implementing of them, and even talking about them appears to be completely missing. If you remember, just a while back, we actually had a thing where the preamble at the start of the meetings changed. Well, it didn't change in any of the meeting agendas I read. My conclusion is that it was talked about in a group where there was no need for minutes, there was no public scrutiny, and there was certainly no transparency and openness. And these things presumably got set and agreed and implemented without even some of the councillors being aware of them. Because if you remember the change to the preamble, when it was sprung on the councillors, there were lots of extremely blank faces sort of saying, what? You know, quite petty things, like, you know, not using your phone. It was agreed by somebody in private. Now, I don't see there is any way that setting a phone policy can be declared as something worth being confidential, because that 1960 Act makes no mention of setting phone policy, because 65 years ago the phones hadn't been invented. So clearly that Act was never intended to actually keep secret policy changes about councillors' phones. Do you get my point? What's actually happening very, very clearly is that important things and non-important things are somehow being discussed with a few councillors, and we don't even know which councillors. But they're being discussed, decisions are being taken, and policies implemented without any notification to anybody, apart from the people who are on whatever the secret working group or unreporting subcommittee is. If you look on the website, there is no mention whatsoever of a standing orders working group, a standing orders subcommittee, yet it must have members. Those members are not published, and it works in secret. And that's my real beef at the moment. The fact that we're presented with the finished product. We're never allowed to know what happens outside of those meetings. And all that rubbish we had when Andy Pearce was clearly not in favour of having live streaming and he wanted it stopped. Well, I think he seems to have got his way, because somebody behind the scenes are doing things. Somebody's implementing things. There is discussion about topics that are not in any agenda, and sticking things on an agenda and saying some may be confidential and then putting the whole thing into that is not on, really. And it certainly is against at least the spirit of openness and transparency, because the council's attitude to openness and transparency is that everything will be open and transparent unless there's a good reason it's not. And we're going to talk about mobile phones, and that would be clearly not worth airing with the public, so we'll keep it secret. So my question is, how much else is being discussed in groups that the public are not aware of? We don't even know the working groups exist, if that's what they are using to do this. But decisions get made miraculously. And that's what worries me, because I've got the distinct impression now that it's a good news presentation. And when something is not good news, it goes wrong. Or the sound cuts out, or the microphones play up, or it's just removed from the website. No explanation. Agendas seem to be rather bland and not explaining things very well. And that's why I'm on a bit of a crusade. I'll be perfectly honest, I don't trust them. I think a few of the councillors, by their expressions, it's their first time they're hearing things when they're sitting in these meetings. The look on people's faces said, "What?" Now, somebody has made those decisions, presumably with the mayor's involvement. I can't believe that they'd make all these changes without the mayor being made aware. But it's never mentioned. And other people have an awful lot of information about things that I wonder how. It's not going very well. I have to say, behaviour has been actually pretty good. I mean, one of the reasons I started moaning about the council in the first place was because of bad behaviour. But the bad behaviour, by and large, has gone now, and people are being quite reasonable, level-headed, and they're trying to do a good job. So I'm seeing councillors actually doing stuff now, and that's to be commended. You know, the meetings have got an awful lot better. But the secrecy thing is now getting out of hand. If a meeting is lost due to technical reasons, you know, and being honest, this is not rocket science. If you look behind me on this screen here, that is a piece of software that's called OBS that I use. And it lets you stream. And on the screen here is a little meter. And that meter should be going flick, 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 because it tells you if there's any sound. If that thing is moving, there is sound. And at the moment, it's not. So if I was streaming now, I could just look at that screen and I would know nobody is hearing me. You know, this is not rocket science. And if you ask, you know, what happened to the sound for that meeting? Well, we had one where we were told it was gone, it was lost, and then miraculously it was recovered. That's great. But presumably that didn't happen for the Town Hall project meeting that I was waiting to watch. You know, that one just had the images, and a lot of people have told me that my video I made with the replacement audio track was very silly, which it was, but it did make me think. But if you can have a meeting and it's got no sound, the official solution is read the minutes. Well, we all know that the minutes are not an accurate representation of what went on in a meeting. We know that. That's not what the minutes are designed for. A transcript is a very different thing. If you actually go to court, you are able to request a transcript. It will contain absolutely everything that was said. There's no editing involved. In actual fact, and in a court, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But minutes, no. There was a discussion. Doesn't tell you a thing, does it? Now, the Town Hall project may or may not have had a nice report about how things were going and how the budgets were running, but being honest, we're never going to find that out. It's just a lost meeting, and we lost a previous one too. So all in all, it's just running along. And my suspicion is things are not going as smoothly as they are maintaining. But I don't know, and I never will know, because the public documentation is redacted at worst and vague at best. And we have to live with that. So this is a bit of a moan and groan. And for once, it's not a moan and groan at the councillors, it's a moan and groan at the officers. Because while I appreciate they are doing a pretty hard job, you know, the suspicion in my mind is that things are not going well and the results are being massaged a little bit. The good news is pointed and promoted, and the bad news accidentally may suffer from technical defects. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overly suspicious. But I've been watching the results, and when you scrutinise the agenda, you expect them to talk about certain things, and then it doesn't happen. And that's what really worries me. I mean, we've actually been without the Town Clerk for quite a few months, and not one person has mentioned it in a meeting. It's not featured in any of the website, new or old. You know, you can't use this public interest, because the public interest thing, in actual fact, most people are perhaps not aware. I mean, you know, because, well, I'm really interested in it. That's not what it's about. It's the reverse of that. It wouldn't be in the public interest, as in it wouldn't be telling them, not public as in me. So in the public interest, for nosy people, doesn't really work. It's that they are allowed to not say things because they don't wish it to be in a public domain. And the wording always sort of infers, I think, to most people that, you know, of course it's the public interest. We deserve to know. Well, you know, we don't really. But they do need to use legitimate ways to remove stuff from public scrutiny. And that's where I'm getting really worried, because you cannot have a blanket not talk about. You know, under the 1960 Act, it's quite precise on the sort of things that are allowed to be excluded. And they do seem to be putting whole clumps of stuff under that category. Remember, in the agenda it says some aspects may be confidential. But have you noticed, we now don't talk about any of it. And that is not democratic. And clearly, there is a process going on. Somebody is actually deciding what is going to be made available and what is going to be kept secret. We've got our new town clerk. Well, weren't we going to find out about it officially? You know, wasn't there going to be an announcement on the website congratulating Sarah Foote in getting the job officially? I mean, clearly she's been doing it for over a year. But realistically, it would have been quite nice for her, I would have thought, to actually have some kind of public announcement, because, let's face it, she's the most powerful person on the council. You know, she is the boss. The mayor may well be able to do things, but the mayors come and go. So next year we might have a different mayor. The town clerk could be there forever. In the old days of Waverley District Council and Lowestoft Town Council before them, the person in charge was almost there forever. You know, they actually tended to disappear when they died. So, you know, that's a really, really important job. But we just pretend it's all right. We've just appointed Sarah. We haven't made a big song and dance about it. I mean, being honest, she clearly doesn't like the publicity. I do sometimes include her in the videos, mainly because her face always says that she really wishes she wasn't on the video. And that's just me, my awful sense of humour. But I have noticed that a couple of the officers are not that keen. If you watch the videos very carefully, you can see them sometimes adjusting the safe zone. The software that they use allows them to sort of, you know, you can see the whole room along the top, and you can see these little boxes being drawn. And that prevents their OWL system from targeting people who shouldn't really be seen. And the officers don't really want to be part of it because they're trying to do a different function. They're actually monitoring the meeting and advising. They're not actually taking part. And sometimes they get it just slightly wrong, and then we get treated to things that they probably wish we didn't see. But anyway, I'm not moaning about the officers, but The officers have to take part in this sort of discussion about what is secret and what is not. Sorry I've gone on, but this is pretty annoying. I need to trust my council, and far too many things are being done behind the scenes with no scrutiny from us, the public, who after all are contributing the money to keep the council going. So I do think we have a bit of a right to know how they are actually dealing with the problems that a council has to solve. And it's not open or transparent. Sorry, I know you think it is, but it's not. In actual fact, a lot of it now is getting to be a bit silly. So please, council, sort it out, tell us what's going on. And if you've got these little secret sort of either subcommittees that don't exist, or you've got working groups that we're not aware of, at least tell us the membership of the working group. Because then we could always ask the councillor, couldn't we? We could actually email the councillor through the proper system and saying, I understand you're doing so-and-so, can you tell me what you're doing? But you can't do that if you don't know who is on the working group. And more importantly, the title of the working group. That would be a real clue as to what they're doing. And I'm absolutely positive that the majority of working groups are really doing good, important work behind the scenes. How do we know? Openness? Transparency? No. It's all a secret. That's enough of a rant for today. I'm sorry it's a bit boring, but the previous one was a bit silly, but this one today I think is quite serious. I'd like to know how my council is working, and I don't. See you on the next video. Look after yourselves. Take care.